Hello everybody, I hope you're having a great weekend and I'm really pleased that you've come to join me for a story. I'd love you to join in with the refrain of this story. Now there's a lot of travelling and so the refrain goes like this. First of all we go on the road and off the road. Now if you're sitting down to watch this story you might like to do that with your fingers on the road and off the road, but if you're standing up like me you might like to do a little hop. On the road and off the road. The next thing we do is go up the hill and down the hill. And finally we go this way and that way. And then we find out where our travellers have arrived. Should we try putting that all together? Ready? Here we go. On the road and off the road. Up the hill and down the hill. This way and that way. And then we find out where they've arrived. Great! I think you're ready to join in the story. Listen out for that refrain and just join in every time it comes. Well, the story comes from the Bible and it's about a little girl, but the Bible doesn't tell us her name. So I've given her a name. I've decided she's called Binah because that's Hebrew for understanding or wisdom. And she certainly in this story displays that she has a lot of that. So she's called Binah. But I think her friends all call her Bee. Little Bee lived in the land of Israel. She had a lovely family and lots of friends, and she loved living there. But one day, the Syrian army came in, and they took lots of people away from Israel to make them into slaves in Syria. And they took little Bee away from her family and brought her back to Syria. She went on the road and off the road, up the hill and down the hill, this way and that way, until they arrived in Syria. And there she became part of a household and she became the servant of a lady called Mrs. Naaman. Now Mrs. Naaman was married to Mr. Naaman, as I'm sure you can work out. And Mr. Naaman was very important. He was the commander of the Syrian army. He was very rich, very powerful, but also quite kind to his servants and to little Bee. And her mistress, Mrs. Naaman, was kind to her too. So although Bee missed her family and her home and her friends, she was pleased that she had come to a place where they weren't going to be cruel to her. And she decided to do her best job and to wait and see what would happen. But she never forgot that she was really part of the land of Israel. And she never forgot the God that she and her family followed. Now a little while later, Mr. Naaman became very ill. He had a nasty skin disease called leprosy, which made his skin go all white and flaky. And he knew that it was going to get worse because there was no cure. And he knew that it was very contagious, very catching. So he knew that when people found out that he had it, he wasn't going to be allowed to be the commander of the Syrian army anymore. And this made him very worried and upset. He wore long sleeves and tried to cover up the fact that he had leprosy, but he knew that he couldn't do that forever. And this made Mrs. Naaman very worried and sad as well. And when Bee saw how the two of them were feeling, she said to Mrs. Naaman, "You know, if only my master Naaman could go back to the place I come from, to Israel. There's a prophet there who prays to our God when people are sick and they get healed. I'm sure that our God would be able to heal my master Naaman as well." Well, when Mrs. Naaman heard that, she called Mr. Naaman over. And when Mr. Naaman heard that, he said, "Right then, we're going on a journey. We're going to find this person that little Bee has told us about." So they all packed their bags and they all went on the road and off the road, up the hill and down the hill, this way and that way, all the way to Israel. And when they got there, Naaman made for the palace because he thought that only the most important person in the whole of Israel could possibly do something like healing leprosy. So he went to the palace and knocked on the door and asked for the king. And when the king heard what was being asked of him, he tore his hair and his clothes. He said, "What on earth are you asking me to do that for? Have you come here to pick a fight? You must know that humans can't heal leprosy." So little Bee went and tugged on Naaman's sleeve. She said, "Not here. This isn't the person I meant. The person I was talking about is a prophet, someone who hears from God." "All right," said Naaman. "We'd better go and find this person then." So they went on the road and off the road, up the hill and down the hill, and this way and that way, until they came to Elisha's house. Elisha was a great prophet who lived in Israel. When they got to Elisha's house, Naaman knocked on the door, but Elisha wouldn't come to the door. Instead, he sent a servant out with a message, and the message was, "Tell Naaman to go and dip into the River Jordan 7 times, and he'll be made all better." Well, the servant closed the door, and Naaman stood there, and he looked cross and crosser and crosser, and eventually he said, "Come on, everybody, we're going back to Syria." Bee couldn't believe her ears. "What do you mean we're going back to Syria?" she said. "Haven't you come all the way here to be healed?" And Naaman said, "Yes, but that prophet didn't even come out and see me. Doesn't he know how important I am? Doesn't he know how much gold and how many gifts I've brought to give to the person who can heal me? He didn't even come out to have a look at me. I thought that he would wave his hands over all the spots and make them go away, but instead he's just told me to go and jump in a river. Does he think we don't have nice rivers back in Syria?" And Bee said, "Naaman, my master, just think about how much you want to be healed from this disease. Think about everything you've brought with you. You would have given gold and fields and clothes and great riches just to be healed from this disease. Well, all he wants you to do is to go and dip into a river 7 times. It's not difficult, is it? You could at least try." And Naaman saw that she really was speaking sense, so he said, "Right then, off we go to the River Jordan." And they went on the road and off the road, up the hill and down the hill, and this way and that way, until they came to the River Jordan. And Naaman went and stood in the river, and then he had to dip into the river 7 times. Are you ready to do that with me? Hold your nose. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And when he came up out of the water the 7th time, he'd been healed. The leprosy was gone. He was so happy. He came out and gave Binah a big hug, and he gave his wife a big hug, and then they all got themselves packed up to go back to Syria. And they went on the road and off the road, up the hill and down the hill, this way and that way, all the way